Hi, I'm Tibbs and welcome to my channel. In the last episode I made my way further north with a few setbacks along the way, but also some of the best moments of the trip so far. Today things step up a bit. This is where the journey really starts to push, so let's get into it. This ended up being the longest walk of the trip so far, and by the end of it I was completely done. The morning started off the usual way, up, getting ready and packing away the tent. Before setting off, I grabbed a coffee from the campsite reception, knowing I had a long day ahead. Once I was ready, the journey properly began. The first challenge came almost straight away, crossing a shallow estuary that ran down into the beach, so that meant wading through to get started. From there, it was miles of walking along the coastline, heading towards Whangārei beach. It was one of those stretches where you just keep moving, step after step with not much to break it up. At some point along the way, I realised something else. The next place I planned to stay was fully booked, which meant the day had just got longer. Instead of stopping there, I'd have to carry on through Whangārei and make it all the way to the next campsite at the heads, so it turned into a bit of a push. When I finally reached Whangārei, I stopped at a place called Tap House, grabbed a nail and a pork belly burger just to refuel a bit. After that, one more coffee and then it was time for the final stretch. That last hour felt like a bit of a grind, but eventually I made it. Once I got to the campsite, I was completely exhausted. I checked in, grabbed an ice cream from reception and just laid down for a bit before even thinking about setting up the tent. After getting everything sorted, I headed out to a place nearby called Brudaz for some food. Ended up waiting a while for it, but by that point I wasn't going anywhere fast anyway. Then it was back to the campsite, a shower and straight to bed. Some days are about the places you see, and some are just about getting there, and this was definitely one of those days. After yesterday's long push, today was all about slowing things down. The morning started the usual way, up, brushing my teeth and getting ready for the day. I put on some sunblock and headed out for a walk up towards Whangārei Head Beach. On the way, I grabbed a small coffee from a stall and just took things in at an easier pace. From there, I followed the beach back where I could before heading onto the road and making my way back to the campsite. Once I got back, I grabbed a few things from the tent and headed over to the laundry, got some washing on and used the time to charge my phone and camera. After everything was sorted, I took my washing back to the tent, then headed into town for some food. I stopped at a Mexican spot and picked up a chicken and mushroom burrito bowl for lunch. From there, it was back down to the beach again. I spent a while just sitting there, topping up my phone with the solar charger and taking it easy. At some point, I grabbed an ice cream from a nearby stall and headed back towards the campsite. I dropped a few things off, refilled my water and ended up back at the beach again for a bit longer. By the evening, I headed into town once more, this time for dinner. I found a pizzeria, grabbed a nail and a large Jamaican jerk chicken pizza and just let the day wind down. After that, it was a slow walk back to the campsite, a bit more time to relax, then a shower and getting ready for bed. Nothing major today, just taking the time to recover, reset and enjoy where I was. Today would be another long one, but this time the views made every step worth it. The morning started early again, brushed my teeth and got straight into packing the tent away. The goal for today was Waipu Cove Holiday Park. Before properly setting off, I stopped at Whangārei Heads for a quick coffee, then headed out across the beach. The route started off easy enough, following the sand for a while, but that didn't last too long. Soon the track climbed sharply up onto a cliffside route, with some pretty decent views looking back along the coast. After that, things levelled out a bit before the path carried on through a wooded section. From there, it eventually opened out into farmland. The trail dropped steeply downhill, climbed back up again, and eventually led me straight through a herd of cows before joining onto a rough farm road. That road eventually brought me out onto Cove Road, which I followed for a while before deciding to take a small detour along a coastal path just to get away from the road for a bit. By the time I finally reached Waipu Cove, I was definitely ready for a break. So naturally, I bought half the shop. Lemon and pear, an iced coffee, an ice cream and a sausage roll and some crisps for lunch. From there, it was only a short walk over to the campsite where I checked in and got the tent set up. Once everything was sorted, I headed down to the beach for a while just to relax. At some point, I decided one ice cream clearly wasn't enough, so I grabbed another one from a nearby store before heading back to change. Later on, I took a coastal route over to Cove Cafe for dinner where I grabbed a nail and a chicken burger. While I was there, loads of classic American cars kept driving past along Cove Road, so I'm guessing there must have been some kind of car show happening nearby. On the way back, I stopped for a while on a bench overlooking the beach before heading back to the campsite. Then it was the usual end for the day: shower, brushing my teeth and relaxing for a bit, and finally calling it a night. Days like this are hard work sometimes, but they're also the kind you remember the most. After a few bigger walking days, today was meant to be an easy one. The morning started the usual way: up, brushing my teeth and getting straight into packing the tent. Before leaving, I stopped by reception to ask about buses from Whangārei to Whangārei for the next part of the trip. Unfortunately, the only timetable they had showed buses running on Thursdays, which wasn't exactly ideal. So at that point, I started thinking I might need to organise a taxi instead, just to avoid walking along a main road later on. After that, I grabbed a coffee and got to moving along Cove Road. The walk into Waipu actually went by pretty quickly, and once I got there I stopped at a cafe for another coffee and a chicken panini before carrying on. From there it was more walking through smaller roads before eventually reaching Whangārei Beach. Then came the final stretch over to the campsite. I got checked in, set up the tent and was fully sorted by around 2 in the afternoon, which honestly felt pretty early compared to some of the previous days. After having a look around the campsite facilities, I spent a bit of time just relaxing before booking a motel in Whangārei for the next few days. That gave me something to aim for next. Later on, I headed up the beach towards Whangārei to find some dinner. I ended up getting a bacon and egg burger with some chips and then stopped by a shop afterwards for a fruit drink and an ice cream before heading back. The walk back along the beach was calm, but by the time I got back to the campsite, the weather had finally changed. For the first time since my first week in New Zealand, it started raining. So I spent the rest of the evening just relaxing in the tent, listening to the rain outside. Then it was the usual routine: shower and brush my teeth, and then settling in for the night. Not every day needs to be dramatic, sometimes an easier day is exactly what you need. Today was supposed to be a fairly relaxed day in Whangārei, but it definitely didn't stay that way. The morning started the usual way, brushing my teeth and packing away the tent to move on again. From there, I made my way down to the beach towards Whangārei, where I decided it was finally time to call a taxi. At first, the plan was just to get dropped at a nearby bus stop and catch public transport the rest of the way. But after a bit of back and forth on the phone, it turned out the taxi was already heading towards Whangārei anyway. So in the end, I figured I may as well just take the easier option and go the whole way. Once I arrived, I was way too early to check in at the motel, so I dropped off my main bag and headed out to explore for a bit. I spent some time wandering around the harbour paths, reading through signs about the town's history before stopping off at a cafe for some lunch. After that, I headed further into the main harbour area, where I spent a while filming a giant ball clock mechanism nearby. I also picked up a new shirt from one of the shops while I was there. Later on, I went over to check out the Hundertwasser Art Museum, but unfortunately they were dealing with a power cut at the time. So instead I wandered around for a while, grabbed an ice cream and kept checking back to see if they were up and running. But no luck. Eventually I made my way back to the hotel to finally check in, and that's when the day suddenly changed. As soon as I plugged my phone into charge, I realised the charging port had broken and the phone barely charged at all. So instead of relaxing, I ended up rushing back into town to find a phone shop before everything closed. In the end, I bought a completely new phone for about $200. Definitely not part of the original plan. After finally sorting that out, I headed to a nearby bar and grill for dinner, grabbed a burger and a couple of beers and tried to properly unwind after the chaos. Then it was back to the motel. After a shower, I spent most of the evening setting up the new phone before finally brushing my teeth and calling it a night. What started as a calm day exploring Whangārei ended up becoming one of the more stressful days of the trip so far. After yesterday's chaos with the phone, today was a lot more about slowing down and actually exploring. The morning started the usual way, but before heading anywhere, I had to spend some time setting up the banking apps on my new phone. Once that was sorted, I went down to the motel reception and organised some washing that needed doing. After that, I headed straight back into town, this time to properly visit the art museum I'd missed out on the day before. Luckily they actually had power this time. I got there right as it opened and ended up spending a good couple of hours walking around inside. The place was definitely worth coming back for. Afterwards, I stopped at the cafe there for a coffee and a chicken sandwich for lunch, then had a quick look around the gift shop before moving on. From there, I crossed over the bridge and made my way towards Mount Parihaka. The climb up was definitely a workout, lots of steps the whole way, but there was also a really nice waterfall along the route which made the climb feel worth it. At the top there was a monument and some amazing views looking out across Whangārei and the surrounding area. After taking some time up there, I made my way back down and headed back towards the motel. That's where I met up with another cousin and their family. First they took me over to Whangārei Falls where I spent some time checking out the waterfall and taking in the scenery. After that we headed out of town, picked up some fish and chips and found a spot along the waterfront to sit and eat. Then we carried further along the coastline to the base of a huge mountain where we stopped for a while just to appreciate the landscape around us. It was one of those moments where New Zealand really reminds you how big and open everything feels. Eventually we headed back into Whangārei where they dropped me off back at the motel and we said our goodbyes. From there I spent a bit of time looking into buses for the next stage of the trip before getting cleaned up for the night. Then it was the usual routine, shower and brushing my teeth and getting some sleep before moving on again. Today started pretty relaxed, but by the end of it, the next big stage of the journey was finally falling into place. The morning started the usual way, up and brushing my teeth just before heading out. First stop was a nearby shop to pick up a couple of notebooks so I could keep writing my journal as the trip carried on. On the way back, I stopped at the Tourist Information Centre to ask about getting up to the Whangārei forest. Unfortunately, I didn't really have much luck finding a good way to get there. After that, I headed off towards Kiwi North Museum. On the way, I dropped off the notebooks back at the motel and stopped at a place called Kobe's for a coffee. Apparently they roast their own beans there, and honestly it was probably the best coffee I've had in New Zealand so far. Once I got to Kiwi North, I spent a while wandering around the museum and grounds. While I was there, I donated a bit of money to the Bird Rescue Centre, and I also got lucky enough to see one of the rescued kiwis. It only had one leg after losing the other in a trap, which definitely made seeing it feel a bit more emotional. After spending a few hours there, I headed back towards the motel and started sorting out the next stage of the trip. I bought a 30-hour bus pass, booked the bus up to Whangārei for the next day and organised a campsite nearby as well. So for the first time in a little while, the route ahead finally felt properly planned again. Later on, I headed out for dinner at Jimmy's Jack's Steak and Rib Bar. One thing that stood out there was that they handed you a tablet when you sat down and you placed your order through that instead of with staff, which actually worked really well. After dinner, I decided to walk the harbour loop again, but this time in the opposite direction to the way I'd done it before. Then before heading back, I picked up an ice cream and ate that on the way back to the motel. Once I got back, it was time for a shower, sorting my gear out for an early checkout in the morning, and getting ready to head even further north. And that's where I'm going to wrap up this part of the journey. This episode felt a bit different, less about rushing from place to place and more about settling into the rhythm of travelling like this day by day. From long walks along the coast to exploring Whangārei, sorting out problems on the move and starting to plan the next stage north, it definitely feels like the adventure is starting to grow now. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I genuinely appreciate all the support on these videos so far. And if you've been enjoying this series, feel free to like and subscribe and to follow the rest of the journey. As always, not every movement was filmed perfectly, so some of the footage doesn't always line up with exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and the journey continues.